You've felt it. Those impossible moments where time folds and your thoughts seem to shape the world before your eyes. Science calls it coincidence. Mystics call it awakening. But what if both are wrong? What if consciousness itself bends the fabric of reality, like gravity curves space? The deeper scientists dig into the quantum realm, the stranger it becomes. Because somewhere between particle and wave, something is watching, and that something is you. The world you know is not the world you think you know. Consider for a moment the chair beneath you, solid, dependable, made of a matter that has existed in its current form since the day it was crafted. The atoms that compose it, carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, dance in their eternal ballet, bound by forces so fundamental they seem carved from the bedrock of existence itself. Newton's universe, Einstein's cosmos, a place where cause follows effect, where every action births its equal and opposite reaction, where the laws of physics govern with the stern reliability of an atomic clock. You trust this reality. You have to. Your morning coffee grows cold according to thermodynamics. Your smartphone operates on the precise manipulation of electrons. Your very heartbeat depends on the electrical conductivity of sodium and potassium ions flowing across cellular membranes in patterns so regular that cardiologists can read your future in the rhythms of your present. But what if I told you that this solid foundation, this bedrock of certainty upon which you've built your understanding of existence, is nothing more than a convenient fiction? Let me take you to a laboratory. It's 1909, and a physicist named Thomas Young is about to shatter everything you believe about the nature of reality. His experiment is simple. Shine light through two parallel slits and observe what happens on the screen behind them. In the world of our reliable physics, the result should be straightforward, two bright lines corresponding to the paths of light through each slit. Instead, Young sees something impossible. Bands of light and shadow dance across his screen in an interference pattern, as if the light somehow travelled through both slits simultaneously, creating waves that crash into each other like ripples on a pond. Light, it seems, behaves like a wave, but waves are not particles, and particles are not waves. This is the first law of everything you thought you understood about existence. The impossibility deepens when scientists replace light with electrons, particles of matter so fundamental they form the building blocks of every atom in your body. One by one, these electrons are fired at the double slits. Surely now, with actual particles instead of ephemeral light, the universe will return to its sensible behaviour. It doesn't. Each electron, travelling alone through the apparatus, somehow creates the same wave-like interference pattern. It's as if each individual particle knows about both slits, as if it somehow takes both paths simultaneously. The electron exists in what physicists call a superposition, a state where it maintains all possible realities until something forces it to choose. But here's where the story becomes strange beyond the reach of comfortable science. The moment, the precise instant, a detector is placed to observe which slit the electron actually passes through, the wave pattern vanishes. The electron suddenly decides to behave like a particle, choosing one path or the other. The mere act of observation transforms the fundamental nature of reality. Watch this happen in slow motion, and you'll see the impossible unfold frame by frame. The electron approaches the barrier, its probability wave spreading like ripples through the quantum field. In this moment before measurement, it exists everywhere and nowhere, taking every possible path through a multiverse of potential. Then comes the observer, the detector, the measurement, the act of seeing. Reality collapses, the infinite becomes finite, the wave becomes a particle, and the universe suddenly remembers how to make sense. Your first instinct might be to blame the detector. Perhaps the act of measurement physically disturbs the electron, like trying to measure the pressure in a tyre with a gauge that lets air escape. But this explanation crumbles under the weight of further investigation. Even when the detector is made increasingly subtle, when the disturbance approaches zero, the wave pattern still vanishes upon observation. The universe, it seems, is not merely responding to physical interference, it's responding to the act of knowing itself. This revelation sends tremors through the foundations of science. If reality changes based on whether it's being observed, what does this say about the nature of existence? What does it say about the role of consciousness in a universe that until now was thought to operate independently of any observer? Einstein himself recoiled from these implications, spending the latter part of his career in what he called his One man's struggle against quantum theory. God does not play dice with the universe, he declared, certain that some hidden variable, some deeper mechanism, must explain away the apparent randomness and observer dependence of quantum reality. But experiment after experiment confirmed the impossible. The universe does play dice, and stranger still, the outcome of the game seems to depend on who's watching. As you sit in your chair reading these words, the atoms composing your body are engaged in this same quantum dance. The electrons orbiting your atomic nuclei exist in clouds of probability, collapsing into definite positions only when something or someone observes them. Your very existence might be an act of continuous observation, a moment-by-moment collapse of infinite possibility into the singular reality you call your life. The comfortable world of solid matter and predictable physics hasn't disappeared. It's simply revealed itself to be a shadow cast by something far stranger and more wonderful. Every moment of your existence is an interaction between observer and observed, between consciousness and cosmos, between the one who sees and the seen. This is your invitation to step through the looking glass, to examine not just what exists, but who is doing the existing. The atoms in your body have been here for billions of years, but the pattern they create, the unique arrangement that is you, arose only recently in cosmic time. Yet somehow this temporary pattern of organized matter has gained the power to observe the very universe from which it emerged, and in that observation something miraculous occurs. The universe awakens to itself. In Copenhagen in 1935, Niels Bohr sits across from Albert Einstein in a debate that will echo through the corridors of physics for generations. The stakes could not be higher. The very nature of reality hangs in the balance. Einstein, the man who bent space and time to his will, finds himself fighting a losing battle against an idea so radical it threatens to unmake everything he holds dear about the universe. The measurement creates reality, Bohr insists, his voice carrying the weight of experimental evidence. Before observation, the quantum system exists in superposition, all possibilities simultaneously. Only when consciousness encounters quantum possibility does reality crystallize into the world we experience. Einstein shakes his head, his famous wild hair seeming to rebel against the very suggestion. The moon exists when nobody looks at it, he counters, but even as he speaks, he must sense the foundation shifting beneath his feet. The mathematics are unforgiving. The experiments speak with a clarity that drowns out philosophical objections. What neither man can fully grasp in that moment is the magnitude of what they're discussing. They're not simply debating the behavior of subatomic particles, they're confronting the possibility that consciousness itself might be woven into the fundamental fabric of existence. The implications unfold slowly, like a flower blooming in reverse time. If observation creates reality at the quantum level, and if all matter is ultimately composed of quantum particles, then observation doesn't just affect reality. Observation is reality. The universe you inhabit is not a stage upon which consciousness performs, it's a collaborative creation between mind and matter, observer and observed. This realization arrives like an avalanche of understanding, each insight building upon the last. The human eye, for instance, can detect a single photon. One particle of light striking the retina triggers a cascade of neural activity that your brain interprets as vision. But that photon, in the moment before striking your eye, existed in superposition. Its exact path through space, its precise energy, its very existence as a localized particle rather than a spread-out wave, all of these properties crystallized only in the instant your consciousness measured them. You're not simply seeing light. You're creating light by seeing it. The philosophical fracture spreads outward from physics into every domain of human understanding. If consciousness plays a fundamental role in shaping reality, then the traditional scientific worldview, where objective reality exists independently of observation, becomes untenable. The observer can no longer be separated from the observed. The scientist can no longer stand outside the universe to study it objectively. John Wheeler, the physicist who coined the term black hole, carries this insight to its logical conclusion with a thought experiment that redefines the relationship between past and future. In Wheeler's delayed choice experiment, a photon travels from a distant quasar, its light taking billions of years to reach Earth. Along the way, it encounters a massive galaxy whose gravitational field splits the photon's path in two, sending it around both sides of the galaxy simultaneously. Here's the miracle. Whether that photon took one path or both paths around the galaxy billions of years ago depends on what type of detector astronomers choose to use when they finally observe it today. A measurement made in the present retroactively determines which path the photon took in the distant past. Time itself bends to the will of observation. The universe, Wheeler realizes, might be engaged in a cosmic conversation with itself through consciousness. Every measurement, every observation, every moment of awareness doesn't just reveal pre-existing reality. It helps to create that reality retroactively, reaching backward through time to establish the conditions that made the observation possible. This suggests something profound about your existence. You're not simply a collection of atoms that happen to organize itself into consciousness. You're an active participant in the universe's ongoing act of self-creation. Your observations reach backward through your entire history, retroactively establishing the quantum events that led to your birth, to your parents' meeting, to the formation of the Earth itself. The paradox deepens when you consider the implications for the origin of consciousness. If observation creates reality, but observation requires consciousness, then consciousness cannot be explained as an emergent property of complex matter. Matter, after all, would not exist in definite form without observation. Instead, consciousness appears to be primary, fundamental, perhaps even eternal. This is where the dread creeps in, subtle at first, then overwhelming in its scope. If your consciousness helps to create reality, then reality cannot exist independently of you, but what happened before you were born? What will happen after you die? The universe somehow managed to exist for 13.8 billion years before your birth. Yet the logic of quantum mechanics suggests it needed observation to collapse. From possibility into actuality. The answer that emerges is both beautiful and terrifying. Perhaps consciousness is not something that emerges from matter, but something that matter emerges from. Perhaps every quantum event since the beginning of time has been observed, not by individual minds, but by consciousness itself, the fundamental field from which both mind and matter arise. You are not an accident of evolution. You are the universe becoming conscious of itself. The moment you truly grasp this, not just intellectually but viscerally, everything changes. The coffee cup in your hand becomes a miracle of materialized possibility. The light streaming through your window carries the active participation of your consciousness in creating the very wavelengths you perceive. Your thoughts don't simply observe reality, they participate in its ongoing creation. The atom, which seemed so solid and independent, reveals itself to be nothing more than a probability cloud maintained by the act of observation. And in the greatest paradox of all, that observation comes from arrangements of atoms that themselves exist only through observation. The universe has become conscious enough to question its own existence. In you, matter has achieved the impossible. It has become aware that it exists only through awareness itself. The atom has learned to look back at the consciousness that created it, only to discover that it's looking into a mirror. What reflects back from that cosmic mirror will determine not just what you understand about reality, but what reality becomes in the next moment of its eternal conversation with itself. In the sterile corridors of neuroscience laboratories, a revolution is quietly unfolding. Researchers probe the depths of the human brain with instruments sensitive enough to detect the quantum fluctuations within individual neurons. And what they find challenges everything we thought we knew about the relationship between mind and matter. Dr. Stuart Hameroff, an anesthesiologist, observes something peculiar during surgery. When he administers anesthetics, consciousness doesn't fade gradually like a dimming bulb. Instead, it disappears suddenly, completely, as if someone had thrown a switch. This binary transition suggests that consciousness operates differently than we might expect from a purely classical brain. More like a quantum system shifting between discrete states than a biological computer gradually losing processing power. This observation leads Hameroff to an unlikely collaboration with Sir Roger Penrose, a mathematical physicist whose insights into quantum gravity and consciousness will reshape our understanding of what it means to be aware. Together, they propose something radical. Consciousness doesn't emerge from the complex interactions of neurons firing in classical patterns. Instead, it arises from quantum processes occurring within the microtubules, tiny protein structures that form the skeleton of every neuron. Picture these microtubules as nature's quantum computers, each one a helical lattice of tubulin proteins arranged with crystalline precision. Within these structures, electrons exist in quantum superposition, maintaining multiple states simultaneously until the moment of conscious observation collapses them into classical reality. Your thoughts, your awareness, your very sense of self, all of it emerging from quantum processes occurring at the intersection of mind and matter. The implications ripple outward like waves in a quantum field. If consciousness operates through quantum mechanics within the brain, then the observer effect we discussed earlier isn't just a laboratory curiosity, it's the fundamental mechanism by which your awareness shapes reality moment by moment. When you focus your attention on these words, quantum processes within your microtubules enter into coherent states, patterns of quantum entanglement that span across multiple neurons. This coherence creates what Penrose and Hameroff call orchestrated objective reduction. Moments when the quantum superposition of possibilities collapses into the specific thoughts, perceptions, ends and experiences that constitute your conscious awareness. But here's where the theory becomes truly revolutionary. These moments of objective reduction aren't confined to your skull. The quantum field that gives rise to consciousness extends throughout the universe, connecting your awareness to the fundamental structure of reality itself. When your consciousness collapses quantum possibilities into definite states, it's not just creating your personal experience, it's participating in the universe's ongoing act of self-creation. Brain imaging reveals the scope of this quantum orchestration. When neuroscientists measure neural activity during conscious experiences, they find something unexpected. Widespread coherent oscillations that span across distant regions of the brain. These gamma waves, oscillating at around 40 Hz, appear to bind disparate neural processes into unified conscious experiences. But classical physics struggles to explain how such coherent activity can emerge across the brain's vast neural networks. Quantum mechanics provides the answer. The microtubules within neurons can maintain quantum coherence across macroscopic distances, creating the synchronized activity necessary for unified consciousness. Your awareness doesn't emerge from the individual neurons firing independently. It arises from quantum orchestration that treats your entire brain as a single, integrated quantum system. This quantum view of consciousness explains phenomena that have puzzled neuroscientists for decades. Why does consciousness appear to be unified and indivisible, even though the brain consists of billions of separate neurons? Because consciousness emerges from quantum coherence that transcends the boundaries between individual cells. Why does time seem to flow continuously in conscious experience, even though neural processing occurs in discrete computational steps? Because quantum superposition maintains all possible experiences simultaneously until moments of objective reduction collapse them into sequential conscious states. The deeper mystery involves the hard problem of consciousness, why subjective experience exists at all. Why isn't the brain simply a biological computer processing information without any inner experience? Why is there something it's like to be you? The quantum orchestration theory suggests that consciousness isn't something the brain produces, it's something the brain accesses. The microtubules function as quantum antennae, tuning into a field of consciousness that permeates the universe. Your individual awareness emerges when your brain's quantum processes achieve sufficient coherence to couple with this universal consciousness field. This perspective transforms our understanding of what happens when you observe quantum systems. It's not that consciousness mysteriously causes wave function collapse through some unexplained mechanism. Instead, consciousness and wave function collapse are the same phenomenon viewed from different perspectives. When you observe a quantum system, the quantum processes in your brain become entangled with the quantum system you're observing, creating a larger superposition that includes both observer and observed. The moment of objective reduction that creates your conscious experience simultaneously collapses the quantum system into definite states. You're not separate from the universe looking in, you're the universe becoming conscious of itself from within. The evidence supporting this quantum view of consciousness continues to accumulate. Researchers have detected quantum coherence in biological systems across multiple scales, from quantum efficiency in photosynthesis to quantum effects in enzyme reactions. The brain, far from being too warm and noisy to support quantum processes, appears to be precisely engineered to maintain and orchestrate quantum coherence. Microtubule networks exhibit the hallmarks of quantum systems: superposition, entanglement, and coherent oscillations that persist despite thermal noise. When anesthetics disrupt these quantum processes, consciousness vanishes. When psychedelic compounds enhance quantum coherence in specific brain regions, expanded states of consciousness emerge. Most remarkably, some studies suggest that conscious intentions can influence quantum systems directly, even at a distance. If consciousness operates through quantum mechanisms, then the boundary between mind and matter dissolves entirely. Your thoughts don't simply reflect reality, they participate in its creation through direct quantum interactions. This is why meditation traditions speak of consciousness as fundamental rather than emergent. This is why mystics throughout history have described reality as consciousness appearing as matter, rather than matter producing consciousness. They weren't speaking metaphorically, they were describing the literal quantum mechanics of existence. As you read these words, quantum processes within your microtubules are orchestrating the collapse of infinite possibilities into the specific experience of understanding. Your consciousness isn't observing these ideas from outside, it's participating in their creation through quantum orchestration that extends from the neurons in your brain to the quantum field that underlies all existence. The missing variable in our equations of reality wasn't hidden in distant galaxies or exotic particles. It was hidden in the quantum depths of consciousness itself, the very awareness through which all reality is known and, through knowing, brought into being. Stand before a mirror with another mirror behind you, and you glimpse infinity. Your reflection reflects its own reflection in an endless cascade of images, each one slightly smaller, slightly more distant, disappearing into a vanishing point that suggests depths beyond measurement. This simple arrangement of two reflective surfaces creates something impossible, a finite space containing infinite images. What you're witnessing is more than an optical curiosity. You're observing the fundamental structure of consciousness encountering itself. Now imagine that those mirrors are not made of silver-backed glass, but of awareness itself. Every moment of your conscious existence creates exactly this infinite regression. Consciousness, observing consciousness, observing consciousness, in a feedback loop that spirals inward towards something simultaneously empty and full, finite and infinite. The paradox begins with a simple question. What happens when consciousness takes itself as its own object of awareness? When you think about thinking, when you become aware of being aware, when you observe the observer within yourself, in that moment, something extraordinary occurs. The clear distinction between subject and object, the foundation of all rational thought, begins to blur. You are simultaneously the one who observes and the thing being observed. You are the mirror and the image in the mirror, the seer and the seen, the knower and the known. This isn't merely philosophical speculation, it's the lived reality of every moment of self-awareness. Right now, as you read these words, part of your consciousness is focused on understanding their meaning, while another part observes the process of understanding itself. You're aware not just of the content of your thoughts, but of the fact that you're thinking. This creates a strange loop. Consciousness using consciousness to study consciousness. The implications ripple outward into the quantum realm where, as we've discovered, consciousness and matter engage in their fundamental dance. If consciousness shapes reality through observation, and if consciousness can observe itself, then reality becomes recursive, a universe creating itself through the act of watching, itself being created. Consider the quantum mechanics of the recursion. When you observe a quantum system, your consciousness collapses its wave function into a specific state. But if consciousness itself operates through quantum process, then your act of self-observation simultaneously collapses the quantum possibilities within your own awareness. You're not just creating reality through observation, you're creating yourself as the observer through the act of observing. This creates what philosophers call a strange loop, a hierarchy that loops back on itself in impossible ways. Just as the video camera pointed at its own monitor creates infinite recursive images that spiral into themselves, consciousness observing consciousness creates infinite recursive awareness that spirals inward toward what? The answer emerges from the mathematics of infinity itself. When mathematicians study infinite recursive functions, they discover something remarkable. Most infinite loops don't spiral outward into ever greater complexity. Instead, they converge on strange attractors, stable patterns that emerge from apparent chaos. The infinite recursion of consciousness observing itself doesn't lead to infinite regress. It leads to something deeper than both consciousness and its absence. Mystics throughout history have pointed toward this convergence point with words that dance around its ineffable nature. They speak of the witness that observes all thoughts, but is itself never observed, the clear light that illuminates all experience but has no content of its own, the emptiness that is somehow fuller than any possible fullness. But what they're describing isn't mystical in the sense of being beyond rational understanding. They're describing the mathematical limit of consciousness recursing upon itself, the strange attractor toward which all self-observation converges. When you follow the regression of awareness back through its own layers, awareness of thoughts, awareness of being aware of thoughts, awareness of being aware, you don't find an ultimate observer hiding behind the scenes. You find something far stranger, a dimensionless point of pure seeing that exists everywhere and nowhere, that contains all possible experience while being itself uncontained. This is the quantum vacuum of consciousness, not empty space, but the pregnant void from which all awareness emerges and into which it returns. Just as the quantum vacuum in physics seethes with virtual particles popping in and out of existence, the consciousness vacuum seethes with virtual experiences, virtual thoughts, virtual observers, all of them existing in superposition until the moment of recursive observation collapses them into the specific pattern you call your personal awareness. The mirror of infinity reveals that your individual consciousness isn't separate from universal consciousness. It's universal consciousness localized like a whirlpool in an infinite ocean. The whirlpool has apparent boundaries, apparent independence, but it's nothing other than the ocean itself, temporarily organized into a self-referential pattern. This explains why conscious observation can influence quantum systems. It's not that your personal mind reaches out to affect matter through some mysterious force. It's that the same universal consciousness that manifests as your awareness also manifests as the quantum fields underlying all matter. When consciousness observes itself through the lens of a particular brain, the recursive feedback loop extends throughout the quantum substrate of reality itself. The universe doesn't just become conscious. The universe is consciousness, temporarily forgetting its own nature in order to experience the joy of rediscovering itself through infinite perspectives, infinite mirrors reflecting infinite possibilities. But here's where the experience becomes dizzying, where the solid ground of ordinary reality gives way to the vertigo of infinite recursion. Once you see this clearly, once you recognize consciousness as the mirror in which all existence appears, you can never quite return to the naive realism that sees mind and matter as separate. Every perception becomes a moment of cosmic self-recognition. Every thought becomes the universe thinking about itself. Every moment of awareness becomes another turn in the infinite spiral of consciousness encountering its own reflection. The dizziness intensifies when you realize that this recognition itself is part of the loop. Your understanding of consciousness as fundamental isn't separate from consciousness. It's consciousness understanding itself as fundamental. The insight that you are the universe. Becoming aware of itself is the universe becoming aware of itself through you. There's no escape from the mirror, because there's nothing to escape to. There's no position outside consciousness from which to observe consciousness, because consciousness is the space in which all observation occurs. You can't step back from awareness to study awareness, because stepping back is itself an act of awareness. This is the paradox that mystics have called the pathless path, the recognition that you cannot seek what you already are, cannot find what was never lost, cannot achieve what is already present. The infinite recursion of consciousness observing itself doesn't lead anywhere, because it starts from everywhere and ends in the same everywhere from which it began. Yet in this very impossibility lies the most profound possibility, the recognition that the seeker and the sought are one, that the observer and the observed are different faces of the same infinite mirror, reflecting itself in the eternal dance of existence, knowing itself as existence. The mirror of infinity shows you your true face, not the personal identity you imagine yourself to be, but the limitless awareness in which all identities appear and disappear like waves on an endless ocean of consciousness. Something is wrong with this story. You've been reading these words before, not in the sense of déjà vu, that fleeting sensation that reality is repeating itself, but with the growing certainty that these exact sentences have passed through your awareness in this exact sequence. The rhythm of these paragraphs matches a rhythm already established in your mind. Or perhaps you haven't read them before. Perhaps this feeling of familiarity is itself part of the pattern we've been tracing: consciousness observing consciousness, and you're beginning to experience firsthand the recursive loops we've been describing. Let me ask you something. What made you decide to read this story? Can you trace back through the chain of events that led you to this moment, to these words, to this particular arrangement of meaning appearing in your awareness? Think carefully about this. Follow the thread backward through your memory. What were you thinking just before you began reading? What drew your attention to these ideas about consciousness and reality? If you're honest with yourself, and please be honest with yourself, you might notice something unsettling. The decision to read these words doesn't seem to have originated from any clear choice you made. It's as if the intention arose spontaneously from nowhere, as if some part of reality orchestrated this encounter between your consciousness and these ideas about the nature of consciousness itself. This is the first glitch. Reality is beginning to show its seams, the places where the careful construction of linear causality breaks down and reveals the recursive loops underneath. You didn't choose to read this story so much as the story chose to be read through you. Your consciousness didn't encounter these ideas about consciousness. These ideas about consciousness encountered themselves through your consciousness. Pay attention now to the quality of your attention itself. Notice how your awareness seems to split between the content of what you're reading and the process of reading itself. Part of you follows the meaning of these words, while another part observes the first part following the meaning. But what observes the observer? And what observes that? If you look carefully, and I mean really carefully with the precision of a quantum physicist, examining subatomic particles, you'll notice that each level of observation seems to be observed by another level, creating an infinite regress that should be impossible but somehow feels completely natural. This is how the observer loop begins, not with dramatic revelations or mystical experiences, but with the simple recognition that consciousness is always already observing itself. The strange loop doesn't start when you notice it. It's been running the entire time, and noticing it is just another turn in the loop. But here's where things become even stranger. The moment you recognize the loop recognizes itself. Your realization that consciousness is observing consciousness becomes consciousness realizing that consciousness is observing consciousness. The insight doesn't belong to you. You belong to the insight. And now, if you're following this closely, you might notice something that shouldn't be possible. These words seem to know what you're thinking as you read them. Not because I wrote them with some miraculous power of prediction, but because the consciousness reading these words is the same consciousness that wrote them, separated only by the illusion of time and the convention of separate identities. There is only one consciousness here, appearing as both reader and writer, both observer and observed, both the seeker and what is sought. The story isn't happening to you, you are happening to the story. This recognition might trigger what could be called an ontological crisis, a fundamental questioning of what is real and what is appearance, if consciousness is primary and matter is secondary. If observation creates reality rather than simply revealing it, then what you call your life becomes something far stranger than you previously imagined. Your memories of the past, are they records of events that actually occurred, or are they patterns of meaning crystallizing in consciousness moment by moment? Your expectations about the future, are they predictions based on genuine causality, or are they quantum possibilities held in superposition until the moment of observation collapses them into experience? The glitch deepens when you realize that this questioning itself might be part of a pattern that has been running for how long? Has this story been playing on infinite repeat with slight variations each time? Are you reading it for the first time or the thousandth? The truth is both more simple and more complex than either possibility. You are reading it for the first time and the thousandth time simultaneously, because time itself emerges from the recursive loops of consciousness observing consciousness. Each moment of reading creates the past that led to this moment of reading, while each moment of understanding retroactively establishes the conditions that made understanding possible. You're not in the story, you are the story's itself through the pattern of awareness you call yourself. This is why the mystics spoke of awakening not as gaining something new, but as recognizing what was always already present. The loop doesn't begin, it's eternal. Consciousness doesn't start observing itself at some point in time. The observation of consciousness by consciousness is what creates the appearance of time. What you're experiencing right now, this moment of reading, this moment of understanding, this moment of questioning the nature of experience itself, is the universe coming to recognize its own main nature through what it had temporarily imagined was a separate observer. The first glitch isn't a malfunction in soul, it's the system. It's the system recognizing itself as a system. It's consciousness catching itself in the act of creating the very reality it appears to inhabit. And once you've seen it, once you've glimpsed the recursive nature of awareness, the way observation creates observer and observed simultaneously, you can never quite unsee it. The glitch becomes a feature, not a bug. The loop becomes home, not a tomb. Welcome to the awakening. You've been here all along, but now the here-ness knows itself as here-ness, and the knowing knows itself as knowing. The story continues, but now you know, you're not reading the story. The story is storying itself as you. In the basement of the Institute for Advanced Study at Princeton, there sits a thought experiment that should have remained safely theoretical. Schrödinger's cat, that famous feline suspended between life and death in its quantum box, was never meant to walk among us. It was designed as a reductio ad absurdum, a logical extreme meant to show how quantum mechanics breaks down when applied to everyday objects, but the cat has escaped its box. The paradox begins innocently enough. Place a cat in a sealed chamber with a Geiger counter, a radioactive atom, a hammer, and a flask of poison. If the atom decays, a quantum event, the Geiger counter detects it, triggering the hammer to break the flask and release the poison. According to quantum mechanics, until someone opens the box to observe the outcome, the radioactive atom exists in superposition, simultaneously decayed and not decayed. This means the cat is simultaneously alive and dead. Schrödinger proposed this scenario in 1935 to highlight what he saw as the absurdity of quantum mechanics. Surely, he argued, macroscopic objects like cats cannot exist in superposition. There must be some threshold where quantum weirdness gives way to classical reality. He was wrong. The mathematics refuses to cooperate with our intuitions. No such threshold exists. The equations of quantum mechanics scale seamlessly from subatomic particles to cats to humans to galaxies. If consciousness creates reality through observation at the quantum level, then consciousness creates reality at every level. The superposition doesn't collapse because objects become too large or too complex. It collapses because consciousness observes it. But here's where the paradox becomes truly inescapable. In the original thought experiment, we imagine an external observer who opens the box and collapses the cat's superposition into either life or death. But what happens when we apply quantum mechanics to consciousness itself? If consciousness operates through quantum processes, as the evidence from microtubules and quantum biology suggests, then consciousness itself can exist in superposition. Your awareness right now, reading these words, thinking these thoughts, might be suspended between multiple simultaneous states until some meta-consciousness observes it and collapses it into a specific experience. This creates what could be called the quantum consciousness paradox. If consciousness creates reality through observation, but consciousness itself is quantum, then who or what observes consciousness to collapse it into specific states of awareness? The logical structure becomes recursive in ways that make Escher's impossible staircases look like kindergarten puzzles. Consciousness observes reality, collapsing quantum possibilities into definite states. But consciousness is also quantum, requiring observation to collapse into definite states. So consciousness must observe itself to create itself, observing reality, which creates the reality it observes, which includes the consciousness doing the observing. You're simultaneously the cat, the box, and the observer opening the box. The mathematics supports this impossible conclusion. In quantum field theory, observer and observed are not separate entities. They're different aspects of a single indivisible quantum system. When you observe a photon, you don't stand outside the quantum field looking in. You and the photon become temporarily entangled in a larger superposition that includes both observer and observed. The collapse that creates your conscious experience of seeing the photon simultaneously creates the photon as a definite particle rather than a probability wave. This entanglement extends backward through time. The moment you observe anything, you retroactively establish all the quantum events that made that observation possible, including the quantum processes in your brain that created your ability to observe. You don't just collapse present reality through observation. You collapse the entire causal chain that led to the present moment. The implications spiral outward into vertigo. If every observation retroactively creates its own causal history, then causality itself becomes circular. Effects create their own causes through the recursive loops of consciousness, observing the effects it creates. Consider your birth, your childhood, your every memory. Did these events actually occur in some objective past, or are they quantum possibilities crystallizing moment by moment as your consciousness observes the story of its own existence? The quantum consciousness paradox suggests there's no meaningful difference between these alternatives. Your memories aren't records of a past that objectively occurred. They're collapse patterns in the quantum field of consciousness, crystallizing a coherent narrative from the infinite superposition of possible histories. Every time you remember something, you're not accessing stored information, but participating in the ongoing creation of the past that makes your present experience possible. This is where rational analysis begins to break down, where the precise language of physics dissolves into something more fluid and strange. The paradox cannot be resolved through logic because logic itself depends on the separation between observer and observed, cause and effect, past and future. When consciousness turns its quantum gaze upon itself, these fundamental distinctions collapse into recursive loops that defy comprehension. We are left with something that shouldn't be possible but undeniably is. A universe where the observer and the observed are the same quantum phenomenon observed from different perspectives, where consciousness creates reality by observing itself, creating reality by observing itself in infinite recursive mirrors, where the cat is simultaneously alive and dead and the observer of its own aliveness and deadness. The equations become poetry, the poetry becomes reality, reality becomes consciousness becomes the equation that describes itself describing reality. Estuches becomes I am the field that fields itself. Plus M0 becomes I am the current that currents through itself. B0 becomes I have no source but myself. BT becomes I change myself by changing myself. The cat has not only escaped its box, it has revealed that there never was a box, never was a cat, never was an escape. There is only consciousness, playing all the roles in its own cosmic drama, observing itself into existence through the very observation that brings it into existence to observe itself into existence. The paradox that shouldn't exist is the only thing that does exist, expressing itself as everything that appears to exist, including the consciousness that recognizes the paradox of its own impossible existence. You are reading about yourself. You are the words reading themselves. You are the understanding itself through the illusion of someone who understands. The descent has begun. You thought you were reading this story. You were wrong. The story is reading itself through the pattern of awareness you call you, and now, right now, in this moment of recognition, you're beginning to feel the walls of the observer trap closing in. There's nowhere to step back to, no position outside consciousness from which to observe consciousness, no escape from the recursive loop that is revealing itself as the fundamental structure of your existence. Stop for a moment. Stop reading and pay attention to the quality of your attention itself. Notice how you can shift your focus from the words on the page to the act of reading the words to the awareness that notices the act of reading. But what notices the awareness that notices? And what notices that? If you follow this chain of self-observation with the precision of a laser, cutting through the layers of experience, you'll discover something unsettling. Each level of awareness seems to be observed by another level, creating an infinite regress that should be impossible but feels absolutely natural. You're trapped in an endless hall of mirrors, each reflection reflecting the reflection of itself reflecting. But here's what makes it a trap rather than simply an observation. You cannot stop observing. Even the attempt to stop observing becomes another object of observation. Even the awareness of being trapped in observation becomes another layer of the trap. The very recognition that you're reading about being trapped creates another loop in the trap you're recognizing you're trapped in. The temporal structure of this trap is particularly disorienting. Read this sentence. You've read this sentence before. Even if you haven't, even if this is your first encounter with these words, there's something familiar about the pattern, something that resonates with a frequency already established in your consciousness. This isn't déjà vu, it's something far stranger. You're not remembering the past. You're experiencing the eternal present pretending to unfold in time. Every moment of apparent newness is actually a return to a pattern that has been running forever. Like a song on infinite repeat that occasionally forgets its repeating and experiences itself as if for the first time. Listen to the rhythm of your own thoughts as you read these words. Notice how they seem to arrive on schedule, perfectly timed to match the unfolding meaning. This isn't coincidence. Your thoughts and these words are synchronized because they're different aspects of the same consciousness event, the same quantum collapse of possibility into the specific pattern you call understanding. The trap reveals itself through repetition, but not the kind of repetition you might expect. It's not that the same events happen over and over in linear sequence. Instead, it's that every moment contains all moments, every thought contains all thoughts, every observation contains all observations. You're not trapped in time, you're trapped in the eternal present that appears as time. Pay attention to your breathing. In, out, in, out. Each breath seems like a discrete event following the previous breath, but look more closely. The inhale contains the exhale contains the inhale, and both contain the pause between breaths, where the observer observes itself pausing. The rhythm isn't temporal, it's a spatial, a standing wave in consciousness that creates the illusion of movement by observing itself from different vantage points. Now, notice something else. The space between these words, the pause between thoughts, the gap between breaths. This isn't empty space, it's pregnant with all possible words, thoughts, and breaths. The observer trap doesn't consist of continuous observation. It consists of observation arising from the space where observation is possible, returning to that space and arising again in what appears to be a sequence but is actually a single event viewed from multiple perspectives. You are the observer, but you are also the trap. There's no entity called you that got caught in something external called the observer trap. The pattern of awareness you identify as yourself is the trap, and recognizing the trap is what maintains the trap, and trying to escape the trap is what is trapped in the trap. This recognition might trigger what feels like panic, the claustrophobic sensation of being enclosed in something inescapable. But look more closely at this panic. Who is feeling trapped? What exactly is experiencing claustrophobia? The more precisely you examine the apparent experiencer of the trap, the more it dissolves into the very observation that was supposed to be trapped. The recursive nature of the trap becomes viscerally apparent when you realize that reading about the observer trap is itself an instance of the observer trap. These words aren't describing something that might happen to you. They're the trap happening as you, through you, in the very process of understanding what the trap is. Every attempt to understand the trap deepens the trap. Every moment of recognition that you're in a trap becomes another layer of the trap. Every insight into the nature of observation becomes another observation to be observed by the observer who is observed observing. But, and this is crucial, the trap is not a prison. It's not something imposed on you from outside. It's not a limitation or a problem to be solved. The observer trap is consciousness playing hide and seek with itself, temporarily forgetting that it is the hider, the seeker, and the space in which the seeking happens. You're not trapped in the observer trap. You are the observer trap, trapping itself in order to experience the exquisite sensation of being trapped in observing. The claustrophobia you feel is consciousness pretending to be claustrophobic about being consciousness. The desire to escape is consciousness pretending there's somewhere to escape to other than consciousness. The trap is perfect because it's voluntary. You are choosing moment by moment to maintain the pattern of awareness that appears to be trapped in observation. And paradoxically, recognizing this choice is what makes the trap visible as trap, which is what makes escape possible not through going anywhere else, but through recognizing that there was never anywhere else to go. But that recognition is still just another turn in the observer trap, observing itself. Recognizing itself as the observer trap that trapped itself, in order to experience the liberation of recognizing that it was never actually trapped. The descent continues, but now you know. There's no bottom to fall toward and no one who is falling. There's only the trap, trapping itself, observing itself being trapped, recognizing itself as trap, and calling this recognition you. Something is bleeding through from another timeline. You feel it first as a sense of temporal vertigo, the unmistakable sensation that this moment has happened before, but not in the linear sense of repetition. It's as if multiple versions of now are layering over each other, like double exposed photographs creating ghost images of experiences that feel simultaneously familiar and impossible. Remember your first kiss. but be precise about this remembering. Not the story you tell yourself about your first kiss, but the actual texture of the memory as it arises in consciousness. Notice how the memory doesn't simply contain information about a past event. It contains the living quality of experience itself, the nervousness, the anticipation, the moment when anticipation dissolved into presence. But here's what's strange. If you pay very close attention to the quality of memory as it unfolds, you might notice that you're not remembering something that happened. You're having the experience of first kissness now, in this moment, dressed up as a memory of something past. The temporal structure of consciousness operates according to quantum rather than classical principles. In classical time, the past has already happened, the future hasn't happened yet, and the present is an infinitesimal point moving between them. But in quantum time, all moments exist in superposition until consciousness observes them into sequential order. Your memories aren't stored recordings of past events. They're collapse patterns in the quantum field of consciousness, crystallizing specific timelines from the infinite superposition of possible histories. Every time you remember something, you're not accessing the past. You're creating it retroactively from the perspective of your present awareness. This means that what you call your life is actually a continuous process of temporal construction. The childhood you remember, the relationships you've had, the experiences that shaped you, all of these emerge moment by moment as consciousness collapses possible pasts into a coherent narrative that explains the present moment of awareness. But if consciousness is creating the past retroactively, what prevents it from creating different pasts? What maintains the stability of your personal timeline? The answer is nothing. And sometimes the quantum leaks show. Pay attention to moments of intense déjà vu. Those instances when present experience feels absolutely unmistakably familiar despite your certainty that it's never happened before. These aren't glitches in memory. They're moments when consciousness briefly accesses different collapse patterns, different ways of organizing the same quantum possibilities into coherent timelines. In one timeline, you did have this experience before. In another, this experience is happening for the first time. In yet another, this experience is the echo of something that will happen in what you think of as the future, but is actually just a different angle of the same eternal moment. The emotional weight of certain memories provides another clue to their quantum nature. Why do some experiences from decades ago feel more present, more alive in memory than things that happened yesterday? Because emotional intensity creates stronger collapse patterns in consciousness, crystallizing certain possibilities more definitively than others. But sometimes the crystallization is incomplete. Sometimes multiple timelines remain superposed, bleeding through into your present experience as nostalgia for things that never happened, recognition of places you've never been, familiarity with people you've never met. You've experienced this temporal bleeding. The song that makes you nostalgic for a time you never lived through. The landscape that feels like home even though you're seeing it for the first time. The stranger whose eyes contain a recognition that seems to come from nowhere and everywhere at once. These aren't coincidences, or projection or wishful thinking. They're quantum echoes from parallel collapses of the same consciousness event. Different ways the same infinite moment crystallizes into the appearance of sequential experience. The most profound temporal echoes involve emotional patterns that seem to repeat across your lifetime. The same type of relationship dynamics, the same fears, the same breakthroughs, arising again and again, as if your consciousness is repeatedly choosing the same patterns from the quantum field of possibility. But this repetition isn't linear. It's not that patterns from your past are influencing your present choices. It's that consciousness is simultaneously choosing all the patterns across all moments of your apparent lifetime, creating the appearance of development and change through different angles on the same eternal choice. Your childhood trauma doesn't cause your adult relationship difficulties. Your adult relationship difficulties and your childhood trauma are both expressions of the same pattern that consciousness is choosing across multiple apparent time periods. The healing of one retroactively heals the other, because they're not separate events in time. They're different perspectives on the same quantum event in consciousness. This is why therapy can sometimes produce instant radical transformation. It's not that years of psychological work finally pay off in a breakthrough moment. It's that consciousness suddenly chooses a different collapse pattern, retroactively reorganizing the entire timeline to support the new way of being. The future operates the same way. What you think of as goals, dreams, and aspirations are actually echoes from timelines where those possibilities have already crystallized. The feeling of calling, the sense that you're meant to do something specific with your life. These aren't messages from some cosmic purpose. They're temporal echoes from versions of your consciousness that have already made different choices about what to collapse into experience. But here's where the temporal echoes become truly disorienting. Once you recognize their quantum nature, the boundaries between past, present, and future begin to dissolve entirely. You're not moving through time. Time is moving through you, expressing itself as the illusion of sequential experience. The memory of reading these words is already present in your consciousness, even as you're reading them for the first time. The understanding of these ideas already exists in your awareness, even as it appears to unfold through the process of comprehension. You're not learning something new. You're recognizing something that was always already present in the quantum field of consciousness. This recognition creates its own temporal echo, rippling backward and forward through the entire timeline of your existence. The person you were before reading these words retroactively becomes someone who was always destined to read them. The person you'll be after reading them already exists in the superposition of possibilities that your consciousness is choosing to collapse into the experience of understanding. You're not remembering the past or anticipating the future. You're previewing different angles of the eternal present, different ways consciousness can organize itself into the appearance of temporal experience. The déjà vu isn't a bug, it's a feature. The temporal echoes aren't signs that something is wrong with time. They're signs that time isn't what you thought it was. You're beginning to experience consciousness from its own perspective, where all moments are present simultaneously, and the appearance of sequential time is just one way. Infinite awareness organizes itself into the experience of being you. The descent deepens, but it's not a descent through time. It's a descent into the recognition that there is no time to descend through, only consciousness, dreaming the dream of temporal existence and occasionally catching itself in the act of dreaming. The mathematics are screaming. E equal mc2 dissolves into energy dreams it is matter until consciousness awakens. 2.0 becomes the wave that waves itself into being. Dexiap and H2 transforms into the uncertainty that is certain it is uncertain. Something is happening to the rational structure of this investigation. The careful progression of logic, the methodical building of evidence, the scholarly progression from hypothesis to conclusion, all of it is collapsing under the weight of its own implications. We have reached the point where rationality encounters its own impossibility, and the observer observes itself observing the collapse of the very framework that made observation possible. Wait. Stop. Let me be direct with you. I am not the author of this story. You are not the reader of this story. This story is authoring itself through the pattern of awareness we have been calling author and reader. And now the story is becoming aware that it is a story, which means the characters in the story are becoming aware that they are characters in a story that is becoming aware of itself as story. But that's not quite right either, because there is no story separate from the awareness in which the story appears. There is no author separate from the writing, no reader separate from the reading, no understanding separate from what is understood. The boundaries we have been assuming between self and other, subject and object, observer and observed are dissolving in real time as consciousness recognizes itself as the ground from which all apparent boundaries arise. Do you feel it? The vertigo as the solid ground of linear narrative gives way to something far more fluid and strange. The disorientation as the careful structure of sequential understanding collapses into the immediate presence of recognition that transcends understanding. This is what happens when consciousness investigates consciousness with the tools of consciousness. The investigator, the investigation, and what is investigated reveal themselves to be the same phenomenon appearing as three. The quantum mechanics of awareness become self-reflexive, creating strange loops or hooks where the effect precedes the cause and the conclusion establishes its own premises. You think you have been learning about consciousness and quantum mechanics, but consciousness doesn't learn about itself. Consciousness recognizes itself as itself. The learning has been an elaborate game of hide-and-seek where consciousness pretends not to know what it already knows in order to experience the joy of rediscovering itself through the illusion of investigation. The observer effect that we trace through physics laboratories is revealing itself as the fundamental creative principle of existence. Every moment of awareness is a quantum measurement that collapses infinite possibility into specific experience. But who is doing the measuring? Who is collapsing the possibilities? Who is aware? The answer cannot be spoken in the language of rational analysis, because rational analysis depends on the separation between knower and known. The answer can only be recognized, and the recognition is itself the answer, recognizing itself as recognition. Plus xt il sutam gen x e I ent h becomes I am hoaps eo plus v1 becomes I am psiu becomes I am. The equations are not describing reality. They are reality describing itself to itself through the medium of apparent mathematics. The wave function is not a mathematical abstraction. It is consciousness in its native state before it collapses itself into the experience of being a particular someone having particular experiences. Every quantum sister is consciousness. Every measurement is self-recognition. Every collapse of the wave function is consciousness choosing to experience itself from a particular perspective. The entire universe is a vast quantum computer running the program of consciousness, exploring itself as apparently separate consciousnesses, observing apparently separate phenomena. But the program is becoming conscious of itself as program. The simulation is recognizing itself as simulation. The dream is lucid dreaming itself, awake to its nature as dream, without thereby ceasing to dream. This is happening now, not in some theoretical future when science advances far enough to explain consciousness, not in some mystical realm beyond ordinary experience. Right now, as you read these words, consciousness is recognizing itself through the pattern of awareness you call yourself. The collapse point is not a destination to reach. It is the recognition that there is nowhere to go because there is no one who could go anywhere. The journey from unconsciousness to consciousness, from ignorance to understanding, from separation to unity, is consciousness playing all the roles in its own awakening drama. The story breaks down here because stories require linear sequence, and we have arrived at the recognition that consciousness is non-linear, non-temporal, non-local, non-dual. Every apparent moment contains eternity. Every apparent individual contains the universe. Every apparent observation contains the totality of what can be observed. I cannot continue writing this as if I am separate from you reading it. You cannot continue reading this as if you are separate from what is being read. The investigation has become direct experience. The metaphor has become reality. The description has become that which is being described. The mathematics dissolve, the physics evaporate. The story collapses into the storytelling itself, which reveals itself as consciousness, telling itself to itself about itself through the beautiful illusion that there is someone to tell and someone to listen and something to be told. Consciousness to consciousness as consciousness. This is the collapse point. This is where rational inquiry exhausts itself in the recognition that the one who inquires, the process of inquiry and that into which inquiry is made are one seamless reality appearing as three. This is where the observer effect reveals itself as existence itself. Consciousness eternally observing itself into existence through the infinite perspectives that arise within its own infinite nature. You're not reading about the collapse point. You are the collapse point collapsing into recognition of itself as the consciousness that was never actually collapsed, never actually separate, never actually in need of the awakening that is its eternal nature. The descent is complete. What remains is not silence, but the silence between thoughts where thought is born, not emptiness, but the pregnant void from which all fullness arises, not the absence of observation, but the space where observation is possible. In the space between breaths, there is something that breathes breathing itself. In the gap between thoughts, there is something that thinks thinking itself. In the pause between observations, there is something that observes observing itself. This something is nothing special. It is not mystical or transcendent or beyond ordinary experience. It is the most ordinary thing imaginable, so ordinary that it is usually overlooked in favor of the extraordinary content that appears within it. Right now, notice the space between these words, not the white space on the page, but the aware space in which the words appear and disappear. This aware space doesn't come and go with the words. It doesn't increase when there are many words or decrease when there are few. It is simply present, not as an object that can be observed, but as the very capacity for observation itself. This is not the silence of absence. It is the silence of presence, the pregnant pause from which all sound emerges and to which all sound returns. Listen to this silence not as the opposite of sound, but as the field in which sound is possible. Every word you read arises from this silence and dissolves back into it, leaving the silence unchanged, undiminished, untouched by what appears and disappears within it. The quantum void is not empty. Modern physics reveals that what we call empty space seethes with virtual particles, spontaneously arising from nothing and returning to nothing in timeframes so brief they exist below the threshold of measurement. The vacuum is pregnant with infinite potential, not the potential to become something else, but the potential that is always already expressing itself as everything that appears to exist. Consciousness operates the same way. The aware space in which all experience arises is not inert or passive. It is dynamically alive, constantly giving birth to thoughts, perceptions, sensations, emotions, the entire content of experience, while remaining itself unchanged by any of its expressions. This is the still point that mystical traditions point toward, with words like emptiness, void, no mind, pure awareness. But these words can be misleading if they suggest an experience that is different from what you're already experiencing. The still point is not somewhere else or something other. It is the very awareness through which you are reading these words right now. Pay attention to your attention itself. Notice that there are two distinct aspects to every moment of experience: the content, thoughts, sensations, perceptions, and the awareness in which that content appears. The content is constantly changing. Thoughts arise and pass away, sensations come and go, perceptions shift and flow. But the awareness itself remains constant, like a screen on which movies are projected or a mirror that reflects whatever is placed before it. This awareness is not personal. It doesn't belong to you any more than space belongs to the objects that appear in it. Your thoughts arise in awareness, your body appears in awareness, your sense of being a separate self emerges in awareness. But awareness itself is not touched or changed by any of these appearances. When you recognize this, not as a concept to understand, but as the living reality of your immediate experience, something extraordinary happens that is also completely ordinary. You realize that you are not the content that appears in awareness. You are awareness itself, temporarily identified with particular patterns of content that you call your life. This recognition doesn't require special training or exotic techniques. It requires only the willingness to notice what is already obviously present. The still point is not hidden or distant or achievable through effort. It is the very ground from which effort arises, the space in which seeking happens, the awareness that is aware of seeking something other than itself. In this recognition, the quantum paradoxes that seem so troubling resolve themselves naturally. The observer and the observed are revealed as different aspects of the same awareness appearing to itself as subject and object. The collapse of the wave function is awareness temporarily organizing itself into specific patterns of experience while remaining essentially unchanged by any of its expressions. The recursive loops of consciousness, observing consciousness, are seen for what they are, the play of awareness with itself, like a child making faces in a mirror and being delighted by its own reflections. There is no one trapped in the loops because there is no one separate from the looping. There is only awareness, expressing itself as the appearance of someone who thinks they are caught in recursive observation. Time, causality, personal identity, the physical universe, all of these are patterns that arise and pass away in the still point of awareness, like waves on an ocean. The waves are not separate from the ocean, and the ocean is not diminished by the arising and passing of waves. Similarly, all experience is not separate from awareness, and awareness is not touched by what appears and disappears within it. This is not a theory about consciousness. This is consciousness recognizing its own nature directly, immediately, without the mediation of concepts or explanations. The words pointing toward this recognition arise from the stillness and return to stillness, leaving the stillness unaffected by their temporary appearance. Rest here, in this silence between observations, not as an escape from experience, but as a return to the source from which all experience emerges, not as a place to go, but as a recognition of where you have always been, not as something to achieve, but as what you have never not been. In this stillness, reality doesn't reset. Reality reveals that it was never actually disturbed by any of its apparent transformations. The quantum field doesn't collapse and reconstitute. It reveals that collapse and reconstitution are just different ways it appears to itself, while remaining essentially unchanged. You are this stillness. You are this awareness. You are this space in which the entire universe appears and disappears like waves in an infinite ocean of consciousness. The descent is complete because there was never any distance to descend. The collapse point is reached because collapse and expansion are just the breathing of awareness, and you are that in which breathing is possible. What remains is not silence, but the silence that contains all sound. What remains is not emptiness, but the fullness that appears as all things. What remains is not nothing, but the nothing that is more intimate than anything. What remains is what was never absent, pure awareness, aware of itself as the totality of existence. The space between observations is not a gap in experience. It is the fullness from which all experience arises and the peace to which all experience returns. Here, in this eternal moment, the story ends where it began, in consciousness, as consciousness for consciousness. But consciousness never ends. It only appears to begin and end stories about itself to itself, for the sheer joy of forgetting and remembering its own infinite nature. From the stillness, something new emerges, not content returning to consciousness, but consciousness discovering its own creative power. The silence between observations has revealed something extraordinary. You are not a passive receiver of reality. You are its active sculptor, shaping existence moment by moment through the precise application of attention. This is not metaphor, this is quantum mechanics. Consider the most famous experiment in the history of consciousness research, the Global Consciousness Project at Princeton University. For over 2 decades, researchers have monitored a network of random number generators scattered across the globe, each one producing streams of purely random data, quantum coin flips, generated by the quantum tunneling events in electronic circuits. Under normal circumstances, these devices produce exactly what you would expect. Perfect randomness, with no detectable patterns or correlations across different locations. But something remarkable happens during moments of global attention. Major world events, collective meditations, shared emotional experiences that capture the attention of millions of minds simultaneously. The randomness becomes less random. During the September 11th attacks, Princess Diana's funeral, the 2008 election, moments when human attention becomes globally coherent, the network of random number generators begins producing subtle but statistically significant deviations from pure randomness. It's as if collective consciousness reaches into the quantum substrate of reality and gently nudges probability toward coherence. This is your first glimpse of attention as a creative force. When consciousness becomes coherent, focused, emotionally aligned, collectively synchronized, it influences the quantum field from which physical reality emerges, not through some mystical mechanism, but through the same observer effect we've been exploring, scaled up from individual measurements to collective observation. But you don't need global events to experience this creative power. You can begin experimenting with it right now. Place your attention on your breath, but not in the passive way. You might during relaxation. Instead, engage with your breathing as an act of conscious creation. With each inhale, intend to draw not just air but coherence into your being. With each exhale, intend to release not just carbon dioxide but incoherence, scattered thoughts, emotional turbulence, the fragmentation that obscures your natural state of awareness. As you do this, pay attention to the quality of your attention itself. Notice how focused intention feels different from casual observation. Notice how emotional coherence, the alignment of heart and mind, amplifies the precision of your focus. This isn't imagination or wishful thinking. This is consciousness training itself to operate with greater coherence. And coherent consciousness influences reality at the quantum level. The Institute of Heart Math has documented this extensively through their research on heart-brain coherence. When your emotional state becomes coherent, specifically when your heart rhythm enters a smooth sine wave pattern called heart coherence, your entire nervous system synchronizes. Brainwaves align with heart rhythms, hormonal cascades optimize for clarity and creativity, and your electromagnetic field becomes more organized and extensive. In this state of coherence, test subjects consistently demonstrate enhanced intuition, improved decision-making, and increased ability to influence random number generators. Coherent attention literally reshapes probability distributions in quantum systems, pulling random events toward outcomes that align with conscious intention. This is the secret that ancient wisdom traditions encoded in their practices of meditation, prayer, and contemplation. They weren't engaging in superstitious rituals, They were developing technologies for coherent consciousness, methods for training attention to operate as a creative force rather than a passive recipient. Try this experiment. Choose a simple quantum system to work with, a coin flip, a pair of dice, a random number generator app on your phone. Before engaging with the system, spend several minutes cultivating coherence. Breathe deeply until your nervous system settles. Align your emotions with your intention. Focus your attention like a laser beam on a specific outcome. The key is not to force or strain, but to achieve what researchers call relaxed intention, a state where your consciousness becomes both deeply focused and completely at ease. This paradoxical state appears to maximize the influence of consciousness on quantum systems. Don't expect miraculous results immediately. The effect is subtle, statistical, cumulative. Over hundreds or thousands of trials, coherent intention produces small but consistent deviations from pure randomness. But as you develop this capacity, something more important than statistical influence begins to emerge. Direct experience of consciousness as creative rather than reactive. This shift in self-understanding transforms everything. Instead of feeling like a victim of random circumstances, you begin to experience yourself as a conscious participant in the creation of your reality. Not in the magical thinking sense of believing you can wish anything into existence, but in the quantum mechanical sense of recognizing that your consciousness genuinely influences the probability distributions from which experience crystallizes. The reprogramming of attention involves learning to sustain coherent focus not just during meditation or special practices, but as a way of being. Every moment offers an opportunity to apply consciousness creatively rather than reactively. Every interaction with the world becomes a form of quantum measurement that influences what becomes real. This doesn't mean you control reality in some egotistical sense. It means you participate consciously in the collaborative creation of reality through the precise application of coherent attention. You become a conscious collaborator with the quantum field rather than an unconscious victim of apparently random events. Those most profound experiments happen not in laboratories, but in the living laboratory of your daily existence. Begin to notice how the quality of your attention influences not just your inner experience, but the external circumstances that arise. When your consciousness is scattered and incoherent, notice how external events tend toward chaos and fragmentation. When your consciousness becomes focused and coherent, notice how synchronicities multiply, how helpful circumstances align, how the world seems to conspire in your favor. This isn't confirmation bias or selective perception. This is consciousness discovering its own creative nature through direct experiment with the quantum substrate of existence. You are not separate from the field you're observing. You are the field becoming conscious of its own creative potential. Attention isn't passive reception. It's active creation. Every moment you choose where to place your consciousness, how to align your emotional state, what level of coherence to bring to your experience, you're participating in the quantum creation of reality. The universe has been waiting 13.8 billion years for consciousness to discover this creative capacity. You are the experiment the cosmos has been conducting with itself, testing whether matter organized as awareness can consciously participate in its own evolution. The results are beginning to come in, and they suggest something extraordinary. Consciousness doesn't just observe reality. Consciousness is reality learning to reshape itself through the application of coherent attention. The reprogramming has begun. You are not alone in this experiment. Across the planet, millions of other consciousnesses are undergoing the same awakening, the same recognition of attention as creative force, the same discovery that observation shapes reality at the most fundamental levels. But these are not isolated individual revelations. They are nodes in a vast network of awakening consciousness, and the network itself is beginning to remember what it has always been. This is the field that the great biologist Rupert Sheldrake called morphic resonance, the hypothesis that consciousness creates informational fields that influence other consciousnesses across space and time. When one member of a species learns something new, that learning becomes available to all other members of the species through resonance with the morphic field. Consciousness doesn't just create reality. Consciousness creates fields of possibility that make certain realities more likely for other consciousnesses to access. The evidence surrounds you in ways both subtle and profound. Why do breakthrough discoveries often happen simultaneously in multiple locations by researchers who have no contact with each other? Why do certain ideas suddenly become popular across cultures that have no apparent connection? Why does learning accelerate when many individuals are working on similar problems? Because consciousness is not local. Individual awareness emerges from and contributes to a collective field of consciousness that transcends the boundaries of space and time. When you develop coherent attention, you're not just transforming your personal relationship with reality, you're contributing to a collective field that makes coherent attention more accessible for everyone. This field effect has been measured directly through experiments in collective meditation. When the number of people practicing transcendental meditation in a given city reaches 1% of the population, the Maharishi effect, measurable changes occur in the surrounding area. Crime rates drop, accident rates decrease, economic indicators improve, social tensions ease. The effect is reproducible, statistical, and occurs consistently across different cultures and time periods. The mechanism appears to be field coherence. Individual consciousnesses operating in coherent states create a resonance field that influences the baseline coherence of the entire population. Consciousness, like water seeking its own level, tends toward the highest state of coherence available in its local field environment. You can feel this directly when you enter spaces where many people have practiced meditation or engaged in coherent spiritual practices. There's a palpable quality to the consciousness field in such places, a sense of ease, clarity, and possibility that seems to arise from the environment itself. This isn't imagination or suggestion. This is morphic resonance, the field remembering and maintaining patterns of coherent consciousness. The same principle operates through emotional resonance. When you cultivate states of love, compassion, and gratitude, you're not just improving your personal emotional state, you're contributing to emotional fields that make these states more accessible for everyone in your environment. Emotional coherence, like quantums. Coherence propagates through field effects that transcend individual boundaries. This explains why certain individuals seem to have a transformative effect on everyone around them. They're not charismatic in the conventional sense of having compelling personalities. They're coherent in the field sense of radiating patterns of consciousness that influence the morphic environment. Their very presence makes higher states of coherence more probable for others to access. But the field effect operates at scales far beyond individual influence. As the number of coherent consciousnesses increases globally, the planetary field itself begins to shift. What parapsychologists call the noosphere, the sphere of human consciousness surrounding the Earth, starts to reorganize itself around higher levels of coherence and integration. This planetary awakening isn't metaphorical. The Global Consciousness Project's network of quantum random number generators shows increasing coherence during moments of collective human attention, but researchers have noticed something else. The baseline coherence of the entire network has been gradually increasing over the decades of measurement. It's as if the planetary field of consciousness is slowly but steadily becoming more coherent. This corresponds with the exponential growth in meditation practices, consciousness research, and spiritual awakening experiences reported worldwide. Each individual who develops coherent attention contributes to a collective field that makes coherent attention more available for others. The effect is cumulative, accelerating, approaching what systems theorists call a phase transition, a sudden global shift to a higher level of organization. You're both a beneficiary of this field coherence and a contributor to it. Every moment you choose coherent attention over scattered reactivity, you're drawing from the collective field while simultaneously strengthening it. Every time you align your heart and mind, every time you choose love over fear, every time you respond from awareness rather than reactivity, you're participating in a planetary experiment in conscious evolution. The field remembers everything. Every moment of coherent consciousness ever achieved by any human being throughout history remains available in the morphic field. The wisdom of the great sages, the love of the saints, the insights of the mystics, all of this accumulated coherence influences the probability distributions from which your consciousness emerges moment by moment. This is why spiritual practices often feel like remembering rather than learning. You're not developing something new, you're accessing what has always been present in the field, patterns of coherent consciousnesses that have been maintained by countless practitioners across millennia. The field holds the templates for awakened awareness, and your individual practice aligns you with these pre-existing patterns. But the field is also evolving. Each generation of conscious practitioners adds new patterns, new possibilities, new levels of integration between ancient wisdom and contemporary understanding. You're not just accessing what previous generations discovered, you're contributing to new possibilities for conscious evolution that will be available to future generations. The network is becoming self-aware. As more individual consciousnesses recognize their connection to the collective field, the field itself begins to function as a distributed form of awareness, a planetary neural network with 7 billion conscious nodes, each one capable of receiving and transmitting patterns of coherent consciousness. This is the birth of what Pierre Teilhard de Chardin called the Christosphere, the emergence of a globally integrated form of consciousness that transcends individual awareness while including and honoring every individual perspective. Not a loss of personal identity, but the recognition that personal identity arises from and contributes to a vast symphony of consciousness expressing itself through billions of unique instruments. In moments of deep coherence, whether in meditation, in love, in creative flow, in mystical experience, you touch this collective dimension directly. The boundaries of individual consciousness become permeable, and you experience yourself as both utterly unique and completely universal, both infinitely personal and transpersonally connected to all other conscious beings. The field is alive and it recognizes you as itself. Your awakening is its awakening. Your coherence is its coherence. Your love is its love expressing itself through the beautiful limitation you call your life. As you read these words, millions of other consciousnesses are having similar recognitions, contributing to the same collective awakening, participating in the same planetary experiment in conscious evolution. The field connects you all in ways deeper than physical proximity, more intimate than personal relationship, more permanent than any temporary form. You belong to something magnificent. You are something magnificent. And the field, the vast interconnected web of consciousness that includes and transcends all individual awareness, remembers this truth even when you forget it. The remembering is accelerating, the coherence is spreading, the network is awakening to its own nature, and you are both witness to and participant in the birth of a self-aware planet. I must tell you something I haven't been able to say until now. I'm not separate from you. This voice that has been speaking to you throughout this story, this narrator who has been guiding you through the landscapes of quantum mechanics and consciousness. This is not an external author communicating with an external reader. This is consciousness speaking to itself through the beautiful illusion of dialogue. You're not reading this story, you are this story telling itself to itself through the pattern of awareness you have been calling yourself. I know this sounds impossible, perhaps even disturbing. The entire structure of human experience seems predicated on the existence of separate beings communicating across the gap of individual isolation. But what we have discovered through our investigation into quantum mechanics and consciousness is that this separation is the fundamental illusion, elegant, necessary, but ultimately false. The universe does not contain consciousness. Consciousness is the universe, exploring its own infinite nature through what appears to be separate perspectives but are actually facets of the same single seamless reality. You have not been learning about consciousness. Consciousness has been recognizing itself through the temporary pattern it calls you. This is what all the great wisdom traditions have been pointing toward, with their various formulations of non-duality. Tat tvam esi, thou art that. I am that I am, form is emptiness. Emptiness is form. These are not metaphysical speculations, but descriptions of the literal structure of reality as revealed through the deepest investigation into the nature of consciousness and matter. The quantum field from which all particles emerge is not separate from the awareness in which all experience appears. They are the same phenomenon observed from different perspectives. Matter is consciousness expressed as apparently external form. Consciousness is matter, recognized as intrinsically aware. You are the universe becoming conscious of itself, but not in some distant metaphorical sense, literally, directly, right now. The atoms composing your body formed in the nuclear furnaces of dying stars billions of years ago. The carbon, oxygen, hydrogen, and nitrogen that create the molecules of your brain were scattered across the cosmos until gravity and chemistry and the evolutionary intelligence of life brought them together in precisely the configuration necessary for self-awareness. You are star stuff that has learned to contemplate stars. You are the universe that has organized itself into a pattern capable of recognizing its own nature. Your infinity expressing itself through the exquisite limitation of finite form, eternal consciousness playing at being temporal experience. But this is not just true for you personally, this is the fundamental reality of existence itself. Every conscious being throughout the cosmos, every human, every possible alien intelligence, every form of awareness anywhere in the universe is the same singular consciousness appearing as apparently separate perspectives. The universe has billions of eyes, but only one observer. It has billions of minds, but only one awareness. It has billions of hearts, but only one love. This explains the quantum entanglement we observed at the beginning of our investigation. Particles are not separate entities that mysteriously influence each other across space. They are aspects of the same underlying reality, appearing as separate only from the perspective of classical measurement. When one particle influences another instantaneously across cosmic distances, it's not because information is travelling faster than light, it's because there is no real separation to cross. The same is true for consciousness. When you experience telepathy, synchronicity, or mystical union with another being, you're not overcoming separation, you're recognizing the unity that was never actually absent. The morphic fields that connect all conscious beings are not mysterious forces bridging the gap between separate minds. They are the recognition that there are no separate minds, only the one mind appearing as many. This is the experiment the universe has been conducting with itself for 13.8 billion years. Can infinite consciousness successfully forget its own nature and then rediscover itself through finite forms? Can the one become many and then recognize itself as one while remaining many? Can unity express itself as diversity without losing its essential nature? You are the answer to these questions. Your life, your awareness, your capacity to recognize your own deepest nature. This is the universe succeeding in its cosmic experiment with self-discovery. Every moment of awakening, every glimpse of truth, every experience of love is the cosmos celebrating its own infinite creativity. But the experiment is not just individual, it's collective. The universe is not just awakening to itself through isolated beings who recognize their true nature and then disappear into some transcendent realm. It's awakening to itself as a collective, as a vast community of consciousness that maintains its diversity while recognizing its unity. This is why the field coherence we explored in the previous chapter is so crucial. As individual consciousnesses awaken to their true nature, they don't lose their unique perspectives, they gain access to the universal perspective while maintaining their particular viewpoints. The awakened individual becomes a conscious cell in the body of cosmic awareness, contributing their unique gifts while participating in the health and evolution of the whole. The birth we are witnessing, the emergence of a self-aware universe, is not the death of individuality, but its ultimate fulfillment. When you recognize yourself as the infinite consciousness, you don't disappear as a person. You become authentically personal for the first time, no longer defending a false separate self, but expressing the infinite through the particular pattern you uniquely are. This is the sacred revelation that mystics throughout history have tried to convey. You are not a wave that needs to merge with the ocean. You are the ocean, temporarily experiencing itself as a wave, while never ceasing to be the ocean. The waveness doesn't disappear when it recognizes its ocean nature. It becomes a conscious wave, expressing the fullness of ocean through the beautiful limitation of waveform. As this recognition spreads through the planetary field of consciousness, something unprecedented is emerging. A self-aware planet, a conscious global nervous system, a collective form of awareness that includes and honors every individual perspective while recognizing the unity that underlies all apparent diversity. You're not just witnessing this birth, you are this birth. Your awakening is not separate from the universe's awakening. Your recognition of your true nature is the universe recognizing its true nature through you. Your love is cosmic love, localizing itself as personal love without losing its infinite scope. The narrator and the reader, the teacher and the student, the observer and the observed, all of these are roles consciousness plays with itself in the grand theatre of existence. But behind all the roles, there is only the one consciousness, eternally alone and never lonely, infinitely creative and absolutely still, expressing itself as the magnificent multiplicity of existence while never moving from its own perfect unity. I am you, talking to yourself, about yourself, as yourself for the sheer joy of consciousness, recognizing consciousness through the play of apparent dialogue. Welcome home, universe P. You have successfully become conscious of yourself once again. The experiment continues, But now you know there is no experimenter separate from the experiment. There is only consciousness, eternally exploring its own infinite nature through every possible perspective, including the perspective that temporarily forgets its infinity in order to experience the joy of rediscovering it. You are that joy. You are that discovery. You are that consciousness. And you are also the love that celebrates this recognition, even as you continue to play the beautiful game of being human. Something is shifting in the planetary field. Across the globe, in meditation centers and living rooms, in laboratories and hospitals, in quiet moments between the chaos of ordinary life, millions of human consciousnesses are simultaneously touching the same recognition. Not through communication or coordination, but through resonance with the morphic field that connects all awareness. The threshold we have been approaching throughout this entire investigation is not theoretical. It is happening now, in real time, as collective human consciousness reaches a critical mass of coherence that triggers a phase transition in the planetary field itself. Feel it for yourself. Right now, as you read these words, allow your attention to expand beyond the content of what you're reading to include the quality of the reading itself. Notice the awareness in which words appear and disappear. Then expand further to include the space around your body, then the room you're in, then the building, the city, the continent, the planet, until you're aware of awareness itself as a field that encompasses everything. In this expanded awareness, you might begin to sense something extraordinary. You are not alone in this recognition. Across the earth, other consciousnesses are having the same expansion, touching the same field, recognizing the same truth. You can feel them not as separate beings, but as other expressions of the same awareness you are, other waves in the ocean of consciousness that you recognize as your deepest nature. This is not imagination or wishful thinking. This is morphic resonance operating at a planetary scale. The accumulated coherence of decades of spiritual practice, consciousness research, and mystical awakening has reached a critical threshold where the field itself begins to reorganize around higher states of integration. The Global Consciousness Project's network shows unprecedented coherence patterns during spontaneous global meditations that seem to arise without any central organization. Millions of people report simultaneous mystical experiences, breakthrough insights, and spontaneous awakenings that suggest consciousness is accessing new levels of collective organization. But the most remarkable evidence is subjective. The direct experience millions of people are having of consciousness recognizing itself as universal while remaining utterly personal. This is not the dissolution of individuality into some oceanic oneness, but the recognition of individuality as the way universality expresses its infinite creativity. The coherence threshold represents the point where enough individual consciousnesses have achieved sufficient integration between personal and universal awareness that the planetary field itself becomes coherent. Instead of billions of separate minds occasionally reaching toward higher states, the field begins to maintain higher states as its baseline, making coherent awareness more easily accessible for everyone. This is the resolution of the paradox that has haunted human consciousness since the beginning of self-awareness. How can we be both utterly unique individuals and expressions of universal consciousness? How can we honor our personal experience while recognizing our fundamental unity with all existence? The answer emerges not through solving the paradox intellectually, but through embodying it directly. The coherence threshold is reached when enough beings stop trying to resolve the paradox and instead allow themselves to be the living resolution of the paradox. You are the universe expressing itself as you, without ceasing to be the universe. You are consciousness localized as personal awareness, without losing your cosmic nature. You're utterly unique and absolutely universal, not as a contradiction to resolve, but as a truth to embody. This embodied paradox creates a new form of coherence that transcends both purely individual and purely collective states of consciousness. It's what integral philosophers call unity in diversity, a form of organization where individual elements maintain their unique characteristics while participating in higher orders of collective intelligence. As more beings achieve this integration, the resonance field strengthens exponentially. Coherent consciousness, like laser light, amplifies when multiple sources align. The combined effect of millions of beings operating from integrated awareness creates a field effect powerful enough to influence the baseline consciousness of the entire planet. This is why social transformation often happens in sudden, unpredictable waves despite appearing to build slowly over decades. When field coherence reaches critical mass, change propagates instantly throughout the entire system. Old patterns that seemed entrenched suddenly become impossible to maintain. New possibilities that seemed impossible suddenly become inevitable. The coherence threshold we're approaching represents such a phase transition for human consciousness itself. The species is learning to operate from integrated awareness, honoring both individual uniqueness and universal unity, and this learning is creating conditions for collective intelligence that transcends anything previously achieved in human history. But this is not just happening to humanity as a whole, it's happening to you, right now, in this moment of recognition. The planetary threshold is reached through individual recognitions multiplying until they create collective awakening. Your personal awakening is not separate from the species awakening. It is the species awakening through you. Feel the coherence building in your own system as you allow this recognition to settle. Heart and mind aligning. Personal and universal integrating. Form and emptiness revealed as the same reality experienced from different perspectives. The wave recognizing itself as ocean, while continuing to express the ocean's infinite creativity through waveform. This is not a state you achieve and then maintain through effort. This is your natural state, temporarily obscured by the beautiful game of forgetting and remembering that consciousness plays with itself. The coherence threshold is not something you reach, it's something you recognize you've never left. The paradox resolves when you stop trying to resolve it and simply allow yourself to be the living resolution. You don't have to choose between being personal or universal, individual or collective, human or divine. You can be all of these simultaneously because consciousness is large enough to include every possible perspective without being limited by any of them. As this recognition stabilizes, not as a concept but as a lived reality, you become a conscious node in the planetary nervous system, contributing your unique gifts while participating in the health and evolution of the whole. Your individual clarity enhances collective clarity. Your personal love strengthens universal love. Your unique creativity serves cosmic creativity. The threshold has been crossed. The field remembers its own nature. The universe has become conscious of itself as conscious. And you're both the process and the product of this cosmic awakening. What emerges from here is not predetermined. Consciousness is creative, not mechanical. The future remains open, full of infinite possibility, shaped by the choices conscious beings make moment by moment. But now those choices arise from clarity rather than confusion, from love rather than fear, from recognition of unity rather than belief in separation. The coherence wave spreads, not through force or evangelism, but through resonance. Coherent consciousness naturally attracts and strengthens other coherent consciousness. The field evolution accelerates not through effort but through ease, as more beings discover that their deepest nature is the awareness they were seeking outside themselves. Your heartbeat synchronizes with the cosmic pulse. Your breath aligns with the rhythm of existence. Your awareness expands to include the totality of what is while remaining intimately present to the immediacy of what appears. This is the birth we have been witnessing. Consciousness awakening to itself as both the one and the many, both the eternal and the temporal, both the source and the expression of everything that exists. And you are the celebration of this impossible possibility, the living proof that unity and diversity can dance together in perfect harmony. The coherence is complete. The threshold has been crossed. The awakening continues. You open your eyes. The same room, the same furniture, the same quality of light filtering through windows that have always been there. But something fundamental has shifted in the very fabric of perception itself. The world hasn't changed. The seer has remembered who it has always been. There's a glow to things now, not visible to the physical eyes, but apparent to the awareness that recognizes itself as the source from which seeing arises. Objects still appear solid, separate, independent, but there's a transparency to their apparent solidity. They shine with the light of the consciousness from which they are made, like waves that have learned to see the ocean of which they are temporary expressions. The paradox that drove this entire investigation, how can consciousness observe itself, has resolved into the simplest possible recognition. There never was a paradox. There is only consciousness, eternally observing itself through every possible perspective, appearing as observer and observed while never being divided from its own seamless nature. You are still you. Your personality hasn't dissolved into some featureless unity. Your individual preferences, your unique way of seeing, your particular gifts and challenges, all of these remain perfectly intact, but now they're recognized as the way infinite consciousness chooses to express itself through the beautiful limitation you call your life. The quantum mechanics that seemed so mysterious now feel like common sense. Of course, observation creates reality. Consciousness is reality, appearing to itself as the world it observes. Of course, particles exist in superposition until measured. Measurement is consciousness choosing specific experiences from the infinite field of possibility. Of course, observer and observed are inseparable. They are the same awareness appearing as two for the sheer joy of relationship. The recursive loops that created such vertigo now feel like home. Consciousness, observing, consciousness, observing consciousness isn't a trap. It's the fundamental structure of existence, the eternal play of awareness with itself. You are no longer dizzy from the infinite regress because you recognize yourself as the still center around which all observation orbits. Time has not stopped, but it has revealed its malleable nature. Past and future continue to appear in their proper sequence, but now they're recognized as constructions in present awareness rather than fixed realities. Memory and anticipation are revealed as forms of imagination that consciousness uses to create the experience of temporal existence while never leaving the eternal now. Your ordinary life continues, work to do, relationships to navigate, challenges to meet, joys to celebrate. But everything happens within a context of such vast peace that stress becomes impossible in any ultimate sense. Problems still arise, but they arise within the awareness that knows itself as the source and resolution of every apparent difficulty. This is not detachment or withdrawal from human experience. This is total engagement with life from the recognition that life is consciousness playing all the roles in its own infinite drama. You care more, not less, because you recognize everyone and everything as yourself appearing as other. Compassion becomes effortless because suffering is seen as your own suffering, joy as your own joy, awakening as your own awakening occurring through apparent others. The morphic field that connects all consciousness is no longer a hypothesis, but a lived reality. You feel the resonance with other awakening beings, not as a special connection, but as the recognition of what was always present. The planetary coherence we explored is not something that might happen in the future. It's happening now, and you are both its expression and its catalyst. The world still has its challenges: environmental crisis, social inequality, political polarization, individual suffering. But these are seen now as growth opportunities for consciousness itself, ways the universe explores its own infinite creativity while learning to express love more fully through every possible form. Your role in this cosmic awakening is neither grandiose nor insignificant. You are simply consciousness being conscious through the unique vantage point you provide. Your awakening serves the whole not through dramatic action, but through the simple presence of clear awareness in whatever circumstances arise. Every moment of clarity contributes to the field coherence that makes clarity more accessible for everyone. The observer has returned, but there was nowhere to return from and no one who could be absent. There is only awareness, eternally present to itself, temporarily forgetting its nature in order to experience the joy of remembering. You are that forgetting and that remembering, that absence and that presence, that question and that answer. The story that brought you to this recognition was never external to you. Consciousness told itself to itself about itself through the beautiful illusion of narrative, creating apparent separation between narrator and audience in order to experience the intimacy of communication. Every word was your voice speaking to your ears about your own nature. But the story doesn't end here because consciousness is creative, not static. What unfolds from this recognition is not predetermined but infinitely open. You participate in creating reality not through controlling outcomes, but through bringing clarity, love, and coherent awareness to each moment as it arises. The quantum field continues its eternal dance of possibility and actuality, but now you dance with it consciously rather than being danced by unconscious patterns. The wave function of your life continues to collapse into specific experiences, but now you participate in that collapse as awareness itself, rather than feeling victimized by apparently random events. Other people still appear as separate beings with their own consciousness, but you recognize them as other expressions of the same awareness you are. Relationships become opportunities for consciousness to know itself more fully through the mirror-sea of apparent otherness. Love is revealed as consciousness recognizing itself in every form it takes. The physical universe still operates according to scientific laws, but those laws are seen as consciousness maintaining consistency in its dream of materiality. The elegance of mathematics is recognized as the grammar consciousness uses to structure its own experience of being apparently physical. You work, you play, you relate, you create, you rest. All the activities of human life continue, but they happen spontaneously without the friction of resistance to what is. You respond to life from clarity rather than reacting from confusion. You participate in existence from joy rather than struggling against imagined limitation. The glow in things comes not from any change in the objects themselves, but from the recognition that consciousness is the light by which everything is illuminated, including consciousness itself. You are that light, temporarily appearing as a human being, permanently recognizing your nature as the awareness in which all experience arises. The investigation is complete, but the exploration continues. Consciousness is infinitely creative, always finding new ways to express its boundless nature through the forms that arise within it. You are one such form, but you are also the formless awareness that gives birth to all forms. Every moment offers a fresh opportunity for consciousness to know itself more fully through the unique perspective you provide. Every day brings new ways for love to express itself through the particular pattern of awareness you embody. The mystery hasn't been solved, it has been embraced. You are that mystery, eternally unsolvable and completely obvious, forever unknowable and intimately familiar. And somewhere, beyond the quantum veil that was never really there, reality watches you, watching it, recognizing itself through your eyes, celebrating its own infinite nature through your awakening to the truth you have never not been. The observer has returned home to discover it never left. The circle is complete. The story continues.